Thanks everyone for being here. And this is the lunch hour. They've already started moving the food out there. So mine is more of a humorous, informational, hey, wait a minute, I didn't think about that kind of talk. So we're not going deep dive into code. So I should be able to get you out at 11:30, 11:35. That's my goal, because you need to have time to eat, take a bio break, and figure out where the next room is. All right, so we're going through and looking at how you can leverage more of the service management tools. I'm just gonna take off that guy. So you're gonna notice me walk just a little bit, especially with the light there. This is an area where your audits tend to not go as deep as they should. In your audits, you're gonna have, oh yeah, do we have an incident management system? Are we creating tickets? Do we have backups in place? Do we have events? Do you have an on-call list? Do you have run books? But that's typically all you have, just that checkbox, and you're really going into deeper areas. So like I said, you know, this is a completely vendor neutral talk. All these photos are my own. If you want them or want some different ones, I can come up with a million different ideas for security or service management on here. I am a lifetime member of OWASP since early 2016. I'm going to be dealing with a lot of OWASP projects just behind the scenes that provided input. So all of this is underneath the same Creative Commons library, license that they have. Key thing here, all opinions expressed are solely my own. They don't represent any former, current, or future employers in this or any other universe in the multiverse. So here, are you a builder, a breaker, or a defender? And I try to go through and create things that upper management and the business will be able to adopt and understand. It's been a while, you know, but Mr. T is still out there. And, you know, just about everybody, their kids know on the Patronum there. And then from the Lego movie, there's Emmett as the typical builder. Or are you just exhausted from doing it all? All right. When it comes to observability systems management, there's not just a single tool set. Instead, you typically have a multitude, and you probably aren't aware of all the ones that are out there. There's going to be cron jobs, Windows task schedulers. There's going to be SQL stored procedures and maintenance jobs. There's going to be something that the sysadmin runs themselves. Might be automated, it might be on just a manual basis. They do it daily, they do it at the end of the week, or it could be the business unit that's saying, all right, how well is my application performing here? Each one of these tools and scripts and checks provides key information for mapping out your environment. Your CMDB, you know, they always say, we want to have all our configuration items, our assets, everything inventoried, and all of it should be tracked and monitored. You're never going to have a complete CMDB, configuration management database. Just, you know, try your hardest to get there, but the key thing in here, you will typically have your critical assets and their relationships. So you'll have your business service, maybe it's e-commerce. You'll have your front tier, your web app. You'll have your middle tier. You might have a mainframe connection. You'll probably have some databases back behind the scenes, your network gear. If I can get access to the CMDB and look at these relationships, even read only, I don't have to run a lot of mapping tools on your environment. And if it's a SaaS vendor, you're never going to know really that I've already mapped out your environment, that I know what's critical, what's not, and building upon that will be the next set of slides here. So the attackers can see everything in your environment if they get access to your CMDB. They're going to have the time to go through and run those queries for all of those, you know, obsolete systems, or, you know, it doesn't really get mapped from here to here, but they're going to have the time to interpret the data that does exist, fill in the gaps to create that map. And that's why I've got all of the pirates looking in the same direction. whereas the sysadmins are just looking every which way, which is very typical. You might have an understanding just of your piece of the CMDB or your piece of the services, but you don't have that holistic view. Regardless of which type of tool you're using, whether it's a discovery tool where it's going through and saying which databases, which components exist there, so what are all of the version numbers, what are the dependencies on there, not just log4shell, but it's going to actually break down and say, all right, here's this vendor's tool, here are all the components, here are the version numbers that it's reporting. It might be getting it from interrogating the application live, or it could be looking at a lot of the informational configuration files that that application might have. So looking at all of those, it's either going to be that remote SSH or still SNMP, PowerShell, regardless, these days a lot of Python, but there are still a lot of agents on your systems. And those agents typically run privileged. So in your audits, you probably have a list of your service accounts, and your service accounts probably in most environments are going to say do not expire or expire after 90 days. Going back to 2003, that was still the case. So I had to cobble together some batch files, some Perl, and some shell scripts to go through and actually change those service accounts. So I did it on a rolling basis where I had my original and then I had my new. So I would start going through application by application, switching them over so that I didn't have an outage. And by the end of that cycle, I now had everything on the new and I disabled the old. And that's the only way that I could do the password changes and maintenance, because you typically have to do it not only on Active Directory or the operating system, but you've got to do it inside of the application. Most of those are going to be a binary manual config file, or these days it's going to be maybe some of the front-end GUI where it goes through and you can do that configuration. Automation processes. I also see this as a big gap in some of the audits. It's not just your CI/CD pipeline, just standard one in there. Your workload automation, batch scheduling, going back to the days of the mainframe. Essentially, you had file transfers. You would have extract, transform, and load jobs. So to go through and pull in that information. The reason why these are so important is most of these tools, even from an event perspective, from the operating system, from the application performance side, are not generating those events. So it's not showing you when those jobs have failed or when there's problems. They're still, and a lot of times, still sending out emails. But these systems typically are going to have privileges across the board. They're going to have access to those privileged file systems and shares where your partners, your customers, your vendors, your internal people are already placing the files. They're going to have access to the databases, your ERP system, anything you might have with HR. And because each one of those components are across the board, this is where some of the most privileged operations can happen. And even in SAM and DSOM, so the standard OWASP flagship projects, they're not talking about batch scheduling in the context of security. If you gave me access to your batch scheduler, even read-only, I could do a lot of mapping, but once I get some read-write permissions to it, I can do the data exfiltration. I can figure out where those databases are, the queries, the data that you really consider important. And because that process is already in place for the ETL and the file transfer, odds are you're not going to detect the activity as anomalies. So you're going to just see it as, oh, okay, this is just normal operations, or especially if they're doing a version change and they're having to run multiple examples and versions of those jobs. Oh, well, that additional network traffic and moving back and forth, that's just some of the testing that we're going on and doing with some of our new sysadmins. Here's just the generic slide, one of the few that doesn't have my photos on it. If you haven't been in the monitoring and management space, and I've gone back to the late 90s when it was just your basic availability, capacity, performance, your old school CPU, memory, disk space. Yep. Yep, and the CPU run queue. Okay, well, on this Unix box, it's running high. Well, is there anything in the run queue, or is that memory and CPU really working well compared to Windows if it was getting too tight? So you're always going to have that. These days, most of the companies have switched over to agentless for that part, but getting the detailed information about the log files, all those process and the stack traces, that's where you're going to have the agents on there. Your log file monitoring, you can do that remotely, but it's so much quicker and easier just to have the initial part done on that operating system, especially if you need to do some correlation in real time. You still want to feed it over to your consolidated logging analysis tool. One-time instrumentation. Back 10 years ago, you probably had never heard of RASP. You might have heard of APM, but all the RASP is doing the same kind of bytecode instrumentation that the performance monitoring, APM, the application performance management. So they have actually an agent that would hook in, maybe some a jar file with the options in there, or some .NET CLR. So it's going to go through, it's actually going to put a hook inside the live runtime of that application. It could add some latency and some additional milliseconds to it, and if it's not tuned correctly, it could completely crash that application. So that's another avenue for denial of service you might not have thought about. If I can go through and improperly configure your APM tools, or go through and say, here's the exact Java classes that I want to monitor, it's not going to be having to wait around for some of those 0 days. It's rather, they're going through analyzing your code, your stack traces, just to kind of say, okay, we're going to keep that on our radar, and if anything ever gets flagged, then we're going to kick it up. Now, OTel, with your metrics, events, logs, and traces melt, probably already have it there. You have to have that synthetic monitoring, so that's going to be Puppeteer, Selenium, headless browsers, Python, additional things. JavaScript injection. I'll come into this a little bit more, but for your session metrics, there tend to be things that your performance team wants to see, your business team, and then a whole nother set of metrics that marketing wants to see. Like I said, your runtime instrumentation, it's going to be inside there, and you're going to be able to get a glimpse into what's actually happening. Hopefully some of these slides will resonate not just with you. You could go through and explain it to other folks out there. Now, right here, I've got the bot, and then I've got all of these different ones. So this represents what would be the synthetic end user experience. So you'll typically have that range, so all the way from excited and happy to scared. So this is something that your performance team is going to be looking at time and time again. It also gives you insight as to how much your web applications might be under attack. So if the user experience starts to drop down and you're starting to see some of those performance issues, you need to be pulling in those metrics into your system to ingest it and then do correlation from the security side. There's a number of different ways you can do all the DDoSes, and you all know that. Now, I did think it was a little bit easier to stick in your mind with the JavaScript injection with the coffee mug and then the little barista not to mention the $100 bill down at the bottom. JavaScript injection, there have been some recent news articles about PII and the health information being leaked because marketing wanted to put some additional analytics in there. So by having the JavaScript injection, it's running on the client side, and they're going to be able to see, all right, what was the business journey of this user? So did they do the login? Did they go here? Did they abandon the cart? Did they go further? What was happening with an A/B matching? But if you're not aware of what your marketing teams and your business teams are going to be, or what they're doing, it's going to surprise you. I have had to go through and put a project completely on hold when I was asked to be brought in, do some monitoring on there, go, wait a minute, you're leaking PII here, you got account information. Did the customer ever bring on their security team? No, they didn't. So I had to escalate it up to my security team. Then they got the customers, and once the customer security team, they had no idea that marketing had even purchased the product. So that might be a location there for talking to procurement. We all know that we need to have tagging, especially for our cloud resources, to know whether it's pre-prod, UAT, QA, or production. So you need to have those tags, but the more tags you have, the more you need to monitor those, not just for traversing your network, but for capacity planning. So if someone goes through and changes your scaling up or your scaling down parameters based on those tags and some of the cloud providers automation, this could be another area where they're costing you more money or they're decreasing your ability to serve your customers. Because it might not always be about data exfiltration. They might just want to cripple you financially. So going back and keeping track of those metrics is very important. Lifecycle management, this is something you probably already have in your audit systems, but how well tracking that, as it goes from the beginning all the way to the end and maturity, and then deciding it needs to go end of life. Your trouble ticketing systems, another key area of useful information. If you have problems that are happening again and again and again, then, okay, well, that's something we know that's happening, and how can we take advantage of that? Well, if we know those problems and know that you should not add in additional capacity after midnight, And also, do your operators during problems, their runbooks, are they disabling the logging controls so they can then go through and access the crown jewels? Okay. Runbooks, your runbooks actually not only need to exist, but they need to be palatable and can be understood by each one of the members of your junior staff. Are they too monstrous to actually use? So, hopefully getting a little bit of chuckles in there and smiles. All right. Your maintenance scheduling, your downtime. If I already know you're going to have a maintenance window, you typically would turn off your event monitoring so you don't get a flood of event noise. And, another way to say, okay, here's an opportunity to target your systems, and you can't really go back to that prior state. Maintenance windows also are directly correlated to your patching systems. Patches can cause problems. I still remember way back in the day, Windows NT 4, and you had your slipstream for Service Pack 3. Okay? If I can go through during that maintenance window, know when you're going to be patching each one of your environments, the soonest I can get to your pre-production and mimic it being a problem that prior patches have had, like either crashing it or disabling the logging, or, okay, well, there's some memory corruption here, but yeah, it's normal. You still need to do the patching, and this is where all of the security audits are going to have DSOM and SAM. We'll have those in there, but it's still something to keep in mind. These days, with all the smishing, hopefully you do have MFAs. But if you can go through and get the on-call list, then you can make it look more realistic. And you can also go through and send out an email from a very similar but spoofed vendor email address, just with some slight character changes. So it might be like support at company XYZ_123. Okay? And then they would send out the email to you. It's already going to get flagged as an external email, which they're going to expect. And if they say, okay, please be aware that we have the upcoming holidays. Want to make sure that all of your on-call trees are already set up correctly, that you're reviewing all your incidents and your change requests. Oh, and here's the link to go through and do that. So, if they click on that link, even if they did have some MFA, if you can know exactly which ISP they might have, then if you have a bot in there, you might be able to capture that MFA request pretty real time. And then you've got access to the incidents and change requests, and especially if it's around a holiday time, or if you know that some of the people are going to be out on vacation because they're posting on their social media. So, that call tree. So, who are you going to call to get back home? You'll notice this one does Halloween and Christmas things, but I try and do that around LastCon on that side. Okay. There are a ton of API talks. There's one right after this, so that's another reason why I'm going to make sure we end on time here. Okay. It could be that some of your internal folks, they're just running their jobs a little bit too often, and it's getting to that problematic stage, or they could be going through and completely overwhelming it, not to mention all of the bad actors out there. I can't tell you how many times that your monitoring teams are going to have to run a REST API to get back the information, bless you, the information that the vendor isn't providing in the GUI, or if they need to make configuration backups, or if the vendor is only saving, say, 8 days, a rolling 8-day period of some of those logs. You're going to have to use some of those REST APIs to get those backups. Who is accessing those? This is where you need to make sure that you're logging the source IP address and where they're coming from, what type of activities. In this case, what kind of flavor of pizza, but it's not just that. So here we have the legitimate one, and then we have a malicious actor. So here we would need to make sure we're logging that as well as the pizza side of things. Okay. Now DSOM, there are some DSOM talks and SAM in the conference, so definitely make sure you take a look at that. But here's where we see the information gathering. You've got the various stages, but you have your logging and monitoring. So all of these are going to be your standard incident management systems. You do have your PII, so that would be related to your APM on there, your logging, centralized application logging, your security. Then here's your different application metrics as you go through. So looking at DSOM SAM are going to fill in a lot of the gaps, but there is no batch scheduling listed here. If the only thing you take away from this talk is to look into DSOM and SAM and batch scheduling, then I've accomplished my purpose. Okay? So this is where you start going through, what is this? What is this? This is the way. So you need to be able to drill down and figure out exactly what's happening in your environment. sorry, I was just looking for my analog time check. Yep, sorry. You know, in a security conference, you never want to have all your Bluetooth capabilities out there. So 11:27 is what I'm showing, and lunch starts at 11:30. So let me go ahead and open up the floor for questions or comments, or even hecklers. Okay. All right. Are you already concentrating on food? And that's fine too. It is actually out there, and I did see them delivering that. So I wanted to thank everyone.
Anything within DSOM and SAM that you think is missing that should be included? Yeah. Yeah. Where would that go? Where would that go?
It definitely needs to be in here, but I would also log into monitoring on here. It would need to be added in a little bit more here. This is where I do need to work with the DSOM and SAM project leaders to figure out exactly where it is. I know that there's a gap right now, but trying to figure out the best place to put it, I'm still trying to figure that part out. So
maturity level 2 or 3. That'll be the first one.
Okay. All right. Yep. Anyone else? One more question. All right.
How big is your Lego collection? I got.
So the CMDB and never being able to properly map it out, yeah, that's on the top of my mind. So we had one more question.
Yeah, so early on you talked about the sysadmins looking everywhere and the attackers looking square ahead. What are your coordination tips and techniques and cultural changes around that?
All right, so part of it is going to be like,
Get closer.
yep,
There
there we go.
Yep.
Oh, one more. Okay, so part of it is just information overload. You get overwhelmed by having to do typing in all the CIs. All right, here's my change request. Go over to the tab for relationships. All right, I need to search for this pre-prod server, and oh, it's not yet in the CMDB. So part of it is getting management to understand that you have to have someone dedicated really to service management and knowledge management on there. Ideally, if you get really far along in your service maturity, you're going to have the end-to-end problem management, incident management, change manager. So part of it is, one, you need to help the sysadmins provide the information that they need. Okay? So what do they need to actually perform that change, and what have the other teams called them out on before? It used to be, oh, it's the network. Now, oh, it's the cloud. That is the hardest part, though. And it's not an easy change. Just like trying to educate developers on secure practices and not do SQL injection, even though it's still there. You have to start off incrementally. So look at your key assets that you know about and start working with those business application teams. Understand, okay, what are the actual connections? What data is flowing? Even your operating system teams are unaware of a lot of the application flows these days. And I can definitely follow up and probably have a 2-3 hour conversation on there. Anything else?
May I offer a comment on your answer?
Go ahead.
Recently, I just listened to the book Investments Unlimited. It's like a follow-up to the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project, and it actually tackles this very very concept in story form. So if you're looking for 6 hours of listen that's reasonably well produced, it's an audiobook, or you can buy it. It's Investments Unlimited. It's not by Gene Kim, though it is produced by IT Revolution.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that one. Because I've got Phoenix Project. And actually,
It's only been out.
yeah, definitely. See, and that's another thing, cross-pollination is really the benefit of the conferences. Any other questions before lunch? All right. All right, well, go enjoy lunch, have a quick bio break, and then figure out where your next session is. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.